I've always been the kind of person who keeps to himself. I don't throw loud parties, I don't get into neighborhood drama, and I sure as hell don't care about what color someone paints their mailbox. I moved out to the edge of town for a reason: peace and quiet. My land sits on about 10 acres, tucked between rolling hills and an old stretch of asphalt that most people don't even know is privately owned. That land's been in my family for decades. My grandfather bought it back when there was nothing but farmland out here. After he passed, it came to me, and I've kept it the way he would have liked: simple, functional, and no nonsense. The world around me changed, though. Bit by bit, the town crept closer. First it was a strip mall down the highway, then some fast food chains. Then came the developers, and with them, the homeowners associations. Few years ago, one such HOA cropped up about a mile down from my place. An entire subdivision of copy-paste houses, plastic fences, and neatly manicured lawns. They called it Whispering Pines, which was ironic because they bulldozed every single pine tree to build it. At first I didn't think much of it. They weren't on my land and I wasn't on theirs. Live and let live, right? But that changed the day I got a letter in the mail. No return address, just a printed header. At the top, Whispering Pines Property Owners Association. I remember opening it on my porch with a cold drink in hand, thinking it was probably some mistake. Instead, I found a notice informing me I was in violation of community appearance standards. They claimed my shed was non-compliant. My truck was an eyesore, and my grass, my goddamn grass, was overgrown and inconsistent with neighborhood aesthetic expectations. I actually laughed out loud. Me, in violation? I wasn't even part of their neighborhood. I didn't sign anything, didn't agree to any covenants, and never once had a conversation with anyone from Whispering Pines. My land had nothing to do with theirs. I crumpled the letter and tossed it in the trash, thinking that would be the end of it. I had no idea it was just the beginning. They had no clue what kind of mistake they were making. They were so obsessed with rules and fines that they never stopped to look at where they were standing. Or rather, whose road they were standing on. A week or two after the first letter, another one showed up. This time it was thicker. Several pages, each one filled with bolded paragraphs, bullet points, and a laughable sense of authority. They had itemized the violations now. According to them, my mailbox was unapproved in style and color, my workshop wasn't up to visible structure regulations, and I had too many non-permitted vehicles parked on my property, those vehicles being my pickup truck, an old Jeep I was fixing up, and my tractor. And tractoring, for crying out loud. On 10 acres of land. At first I figured they were just confused. Maybe someone at the HOA office mistakenly believed I was part of their little vinyl fence utopia. I wrote them back a simple letter explaining I wasn't a resident of Whispering Pines. I wasn't under their jurisdiction. My property wasn't part of their subdivision. Hell, the land had been legally in my family since the 1960s. Long before their cookie-cutter neighborhood was ever dreamed up in some developer's conference room. I mailed it certified. Figured that would be the end of the nonsense. It wasn't. The next letter came 2 days later. No acknowledgement of mine, no apology. Just more violations, more threats, and now they were talking about daily non-compliance fees. They had the gall to say that if I didn't bring my property into alignment with community standards within 30 days, they'd begin enforcement actions, which included potential liens and legal escalation. I tried calling the number they listed. Some bored-sounding woman answered, didn't give her name, and acted like I was wasting her time. I told her I wasn't part of their HOA, and she responded like I was speaking a foreign language. She kept repeating, if your property borders Whispering Pines, you are subject to our guidelines. Not how the law works, I told her. We'll see about that, she muttered before hanging up. That was when I knew they weren't confused. They were just arrogant, drunk on power. The HOA board must have thought they could intimidate me into compliance the same way they bullied their own members. But I wasn't one of them. I didn't care about their meetings, their bylaws, or their little neighborhood watch group that walked around like they were patrolling a gated community instead of a bunch of cul-de-sacs off a 2-lane road. What really started to grind my gears was how the people around me started to act. There were a couple of new homeowners who had to drive past my land to get to their subdivision, and suddenly they were giving me dirty looks as they passed. One lady stopped once while I was working on my fence and suggested I consider cutting my grass more frequently. A guy in a golf cart, because yes, they had golf carts now, shook his head and muttered something about bringing down the neighborhood. It was surreal. I had lived here for years, and now somehow I was the outcast on my own land. All because a bunch of clipboard tyrants decided I didn't fit their aesthetic. About a month after the letters started, I came home to find a thick envelope taped to my front door, big bold letters across the top. Final notice, outstanding. Tunisdiku. I opened it right there on the porch, already annoyed, expecting some new round of threats. But what I read didn't just irritate me, it stunned me. According to their ledger, I now owed $524,325.87 in fines, $500,000, for violations I never agreed to, issued by an organization I never joined. They had broken it down in excruciating detail. Daily non-compliance fees dating back 3 months at $250 a day, multiplied across multiple infractions. Each day counted as a new offense. There were fines for unapproved accessory structures, my shed, unauthorized vehicle storage, my truck and tractor, failure to maintain landscaping, and even operating a business from home, because I'd listed my property address on the paperwork for a small online parts business I ran out of my garage. I reread it 3 times, thinking it had to be some kind of mistake. Or a prank. But they weren't kidding. The last page had a signature from the president of the Whispering Pines HOA, a smug little stamp at the bottom, and a threat to take further action through the county court if balance remains unpaid. That's when I got a lawyer involved. I took the whole stack of letters and fines and dropped them on his desk. He looked through them slowly, his brow furrowing deeper with every page. After about 20 minutes, he leaned back in his chair and said, "They have absolutely no legal basis to enforce any of this." That was a relief, sure, but I wasn't done. I told him I wanted to meet with the HOA board and settle this face to face. If they were just being overzealous, maybe a little logic would snap them out of it. We scheduled a meeting, and I showed up with my lawyer. That was the first time I met Carly, the HOA president. Carl looked exactly how you'd expect. The president of a power-tripping HOA to look. Polo shirt tucked into khakis, Bluetooth earpiece still stuck in one ear, and a smirk that screamed, "I've read the bylaws." The rest of the board sat around a folding table in the Whispering Pines clubhouse, sipping coffee like they were running the damn Pentagon. I calmly explained my situation. That I wasn't in their HOA, never had been, and that all the fines they were sending were baseless. Carl barely looked up from his notes. "Your property borders our community. The appearance of your land affects our property values. That gives us standing to enforce standards." My lawyer tried to jump in, but Carl cut him off. "Look, we've dealt with stubborn residents before. You can either comply or face the consequences. This isn't personal." Oh, but it was. I walked out of that meeting furious. I knew then that Carl didn't just misunderstand the law. He thought he was the law. Worse, he thought he could bully people with official-looking papers and bluster until they broke. 2 weeks later, I got a notice from the county. The HOA had actually filed paperwork trying to place a lion on my property for unpaid fines. They cited their own documents as justification. Never mind the fact that I was never legally bound to any of their nonsense. That was it. That was the line. They wanted to push? Fine. I was about to push back, hard. A few days after the lien notice came in, I sat in my lawyer's office again, this time going over every scrap of documentation I had on my land. I brought the old survey maps, property deeds, tax records, everything I could find in my grandfather's old lockbox in the county archives. I was done playing defense. If they wanted a war, I wanted to know exactly what battlefield we were standing on. We laid the documents out across his conference table, piecing together the history of the land like a puzzle. My lot was large, oddly shaped, and had been untouched for decades. The road that ran through it, just a narrow stretch of cracked asphalt, was something I'd always taken for granted. It was just there. An old farm road my grandfather used to bring in supplies, the same one I used to get to town and back. But as we traced the lines on the plat maps, something clicked. The road cut directly through Iimior's land, not around it, not beside it. Through it. And just past that stretch, on the other side of a small bridge, sat the entrance to Whispering Pines. Their entire subdivision, dozens of homes, driveways, cul-de-sacs, was accessible by exactly one road. The one I owned? I leaned over the table, tapping the map. They don't have a second access point? My lawyer looked at me, eyebrows raised. If this is current, then no, that road is it. We double-checked the records. The HOA's developer had gotten a temporary access agreement decades ago when the area was first being cleared. But it had never been formalized into a permanent easement. It was essentially a handshake deal between the original developer and a now defunct company. No legal obligation, no county mandate, nothing binding. That road, the one they used every single day, was legally mine. And if I wanted to, I could block it off entirely. I sat back in my chair and felt the slow burn of a grin forming. All their threats, all their smug letters and trumped-up fines, and they never once stopped to consider who owned the ground beneath their tires. They were so busy puffing up their chests and quoting bylaws, they never looked at the plat. It was like finding the ace up your sleeve after being dealt a terrible hand. I'd been on the ropes, but now I held all the cards. They wanted to play hardball, I said, more to myself than anyone else, my voice calm and steady. They picked the wrong landowner. The next few weeks were a blur of planning, paperwork, and pure, calculated satisfaction. I wasn't just going to slam a gate down and call it a day. I wanted everything to be airtight, bulletproof, and legally unshakable. I knew the kind of people I was dealing with now. They'd throw every tantrum and legal threat they could think of. So I made sure I was 10 steps ahead before I made a single move. I hired a property rights attorney with a reputation for being ruthless. She combed through every title, easement record, and county ordinance related to that stretch of land. Her conclusion? I had every legal right to control access to that road. It was privately owned, never dedicated to the public, and there were 0 recorded easements granting the HOA or its residents the right to use it. The temporary access arrangement from the original developer had expired years ago. Legally, I could have dug a trench across the asphalt and filled it with water. If I wanted to. I didn't go that far, though. I kept it clean. First, I had a contractor install a heavy-duty steel gate right at the mouth of the road, technically still on my property, about 50 feet before the bridge that crossed into Whispering Pines. I added a keypad entry system with remote access capability, and posted a few signs that read, "Private road, authorized access only." Then I sent out the letters, registered, return receipt requested. One to the HOA board, and copies to every single homeowner in Whispering Pines. The letter was short and formal. Effective immediately, vehicle access to the private road crossing my property, previously used by Whispering Pines residents, is restricted. All residents may continue using the road under a monthly access license agreement. The standard rate is $500 per household, payable at the start of each month. Alternately, the HOA may negotiate a permanent easement for a one-time fee to be determined. Failure to respond will result in access codes being revoked. I quoted every applicable property code, attached maps, deed copies, legal citations, everything clean, above board, and signed by both me and my attorney. And then I waited. The explosion came faster than I expected. First came the frantic emails and phone calls, most of which I ignored. Then came the HOA emergency meeting where Carl, the smug president, told everyone it was just a bluff, and that I'd back down once pressure mounted. That was his second major mistake. His first was thinking he could bully me. I watched the chaos unfold from my front porch, like I was sitting in the director's chair of a slow-motion train wreck. Cars started lining up at the gate, unsure what to do. Delivery trucks turned around. School buses didn't show up. People were late to work. Landscapers sat idling outside with no code to get in. And Carl? Carl still thought this was a game. He was about to learn just how real it was. Within 2 days of the gate going up, Whispering Pines turned into a madhouse. At first, it was kind of entertaining, watching SUVs back up in confusion, seeing people walk up to the keypad and stare like it might magically open for them. But by day 3, it had become full-on chaos. No one had codes, no one had paid the access fee, and I wasn't giving out freebies. Delivery drivers turned around after sitting in line. Amazon, FedEx, even the pizza guy. It didn't matter. School buses didn't come. Parents had to drive their kids to the next closest pickup point, which was about 3 miles away. Trash. Day came and went, and garbage bins sat full and baking in the sun. The neighborhood's fancy landscaping crews couldn't get in either, so all those pristine lawns started looking just a little scruffier. And then there were the residents, dozens of them stranded outside their own neighborhood. Some parked on the side of the county road and tried to walk in. Others just sat in their cars, honking and calling the HOA like they expected someone to magically make the gate disappear. Carl, of course, finally showed up in person. He drove right up to the gate in his shiny black Lexus, parked diagonally across the gravel shoulder, like he was staging a scene. I saw him through my security cam feed, pacing back and forth outside the keypad like he was building up a monologue. And then, just like clockwork, I got the knock at my front door. He didn't bother with pleasantries. "This is harassment," he snapped the moment I opened the door. "You can't do this." I calmly held up a copy of the deed. "Yes, Carl," I said. "I can. And I am." He puffed up, trying to make his khakis look intimidating. "You're going to be sued. You'll be in court for years. We're filing for emergency access, injunctions, legal recourse." I cut him off. "You tried to fine me $500,000 over a mailbox, Carl. I'm just charging rent for my road." He sputtered, face turning red. "This is extortion." "No," I said, stepping onto the porch. "This is property law." That shut him up. Word spread faster than I expected. A few residents must have tipped off the local news, because by the end of the week I had a reporter on my doorstep. She wanted to hear my side of the story. I gave it to her calmly and clearly, with a copy of the old plat map in one hand and the HOA's absurd fine ledger in the other. The segment aired that night. Man fined $500K by HOA, turns tables, by closing their only road. The internet loved it. I was getting emails from total strangers, some offering donations for legal fees, didn't need them. Others just sending support. And Whispering Pines, well, they were learning a hard lesson in humility, and I was just getting started. It didn't take long for the HOA to implode under the weight of its own stupidity. Once the local news picked up the story, it spread like wildfire. Social media had a field day. Memes started popping up, photos of my gate with captions like, "You shall not pass," "without paying rent," and "HOA learns the wrong guy." Owns the road. People loved it. I became the unofficial face of petty justice. But for the Whispering Pines board, it was a disaster. Homeowners turned on them fast. The same folks who had sneered at me for my tall grass and old Jeep were now screaming at Carl and the board for not doing their due diligence before going to war. Apparently nobody in the HOA leadership had ever bothered to double-check the road's ownership. They just assumed, like everything else, that they had the power, and that was enough. It wasn't. At the next town hall meeting, which someone streamed live on Facebook, all hell broke loose. A packed room of furious residents demanded answers while Carl tried to stumble through a prepared statement. People were shouting over him, asking why their kids couldn't get to school, why they'd missed work, why UPS had started refusing Whispering Pines deliveries altogether. One older guy stood up and shouted, "I bought a house, not a hostage." Situation. That clip alone got over 2 million views. And then came the lawsuits. Multiple residents filed claims against the HOA for negligence and mismanagement. One family even claimed emotional distress because their child missed critical medication deliveries. A few of them banded together and hired a real bulldog of a lawyer, ironically the same one who'd helped me set up the gate. Carl tried to hold on, but it was over. He resigned in disgrace a week later, citing personal reasons. Another board member was caught forging a backdated easement document, which, fun fact, is very illegal. By the time the dust settled, the entire HOA board had either resigned or been voted out. The homeowners were left scrambling, trying to keep the community from falling apart. Eventually, the new interim board came to me, hats in hand. They offered a formal apology and asked, very politely, if I'd be willing to sell them a permanent easement. I didn't come cheap. Between the legal settlement, the access rights, and a few goodwill clauses, I walked away with just over 650,000 euros. And that didn't include the monthly usage fees they'd already paid during the dispute. Poetic, really. They tried to fine me $500,000 over nonsense, and ended up paying me even more just to use the road they thought they ruled. My mailbox, still bright red. My grass, still doing its own wild, glorious thing. And me? I sit on my porch most evenings, watching the HOA members roll by, a little slower, a little quieter, and I can't help but smile. They finally learned what respect for property really looks like. It's funny how things come full circle. A year ago, I was just a guy who wanted to be left alone. Tinker in my shed, drink coffee on the porch, maybe fix up the old tractor if the mood struck. Then a bunch of clipboard warriors with matching polos decided I didn't mow my grass to regulation standards, and here we are. Looking back, the most satisfying part wasn't the money, though I'll admit, cashing a six-figure check from the same people who once threatened to tow my truck felt pretty damn poetic. No, the best part was beating them at their own game, not with yelling or fists or petty revenge, but with patience, facts, and a healthy respect for paperwork. Bullies always assume the quiet guy is the easy target. They don't realize that some of us have been reading property records longer than they've owned a home. Some of us don't need to shout to win. We just need a good lawyer, a plat map, and a little push. After the dust settled, I finally treated myself to something I'd been dreaming about for years. I used part of the settlement to build a proper workshop. Heated floors, reinforced benches, custom tool racks, the whole deal. Even added a little pond out back where I can sit with a fishing pole and watch the world forget how loud it used to be. Every now and then, a Whispering Pines resident drives past, slower than they used to. Some wave, some avoid eye contact. I don't hold a grudge. Well, maybe just a small, satisfying one. But here's what I'll say for anyone reading this, nodding along because they've dealt with the same kind of nonsense. Stand your ground. Know your rights, read the fine print. Don't be intimidated by people who weaponize rules they don't even understand themselves. The loudest guy in the room isn't always the smartest. Sometimes it's the quiet landowner with a stubborn streak and a really solid gate. And to any HOA out there who thinks about pulling the same stunt, maybe, just maybe, remember this story before you send that fine for a crooked mailbox or non-regulation garden gnome. Because next time you try to flex your power, I hope you remember whose road you're standing on.